Now today's video for you is part 1 of how to paint an Asian otter. So I'm going to teach you how to paint realistic animals in watercolour, and this is one of the older videos on my Patreon online school, re-edited and re-released for more people to enjoy. So let's get the brushes wet and let's get started. This is this month's project for you, and this time we're going to be working on a otter. Okay? Alright, so what I'm going to work on, this is obviously the £140 Bockingford stretch paper. Okay, this is already stretched on one of my boards, my usual kind of board stretching, which I've already put a video on here for, so you can see how that's all kind of put together on there. And the size of this one is 25 centimetres by 21 centimetres. So that'll give you some ideas on the size that we've got here. So it's not quite A4. Right, so what we're going to do is get the drawing on there first. So we use the old method again. So this again is using the trace down paper. So I've already got some marks laid out on here in preparation for this. So remember, I tend to put marks on the paper in places where it's not going to show. You can just make out some marks on the top of the paper here. Maybe you might be able to see these on the side as well. So they're in line with the cheapy printout I've put on there. Okay, so what we're going to do is transfer this down onto the paper now. So what I've done, I've put the trace down paper underneath. It's always the shiny side down, okay? So try and remember that. If you're not sure, just kind of test it with your thumbnail away from the picture itself. So let's get this drawn out. I'm going to go to the edge of the paper, so I'm going to extend this down and get all the edge drawn out. I'll fast forward this a little bit for you, so you don't have to watch all of this, because it's kind of obvious what I'm doing. Now this particular otter, out of interest, for those people that want to know which one it is, this is not the European otter, this is the Asian short-clawed otter. Okay, I think it's got a very cute face, this one. Remember, this area here is nothing to do with this otter, okay, that's another one in the background, which is kind of tucked away and hidden. Okay, so I know there's more white hairs here, but we'll add those in onto the background at another time. So again, down to the chinny chin chin, and all the way down to the bottom of the paper. I'm not being precise, just as a rough guide, that's all we're doing it for. Now fingers crossed, that should have transferred onto the watercolour paper in preparation for doing the background, and there it is. And if it's not quite there, you can always add a little bit of line just to kind of make sure it stays there. So back and forwards, make sure it's okay, then take off the paper, and then we're ready to get the masking fluid on. So let's do that next. Right, so for the masking fluid, what we're going to use is the one I tend to normally use is a blue one, and that's the SAA blue mask. I'm going to get a plastic container. I'm going to pour some of this blue masking fluid into the container. So we've got the masking fluid in the container. We've got an old brush, which is this one here. There's one of my old already used brushes where the tip has worn off on it a little bit, it's a bit rounded. And I've got a cocktail stick. Okay, right, so let's get stuck in and see what we can do. The bottom area first, I think. So picking the masking fluid up. I'm going to kind of put this away from the edge, but I'm going to do a little area at a time. So again, this section I'll probably speed up a little bit, because you've seen this done before on the previous videos. So what I'm going to do is get a cocktail stick and just drag some of that area out at different kind of strengths, different lines, different angles, just so we can get some final lines coming out away from the otter. Just before it dries, it will dry very quickly, as I know with masking fluid. It's not doesn't stay wet for long. So do the same again. Do one small section at a time when you do this. Don't try and do too much at once. So the same again there. And again, pull out some little details here and there. If you haven't got enough on there, it won't pull out. So I just want to put a little bit more down there. Okay. And pull those areas out. You have to clean the masking fluid off the cocktail stick every now and then. See, it's starting to pick up that masking fluid that's starting to dry, so try not to go back to the areas you've already done. Okay, so I'm working my way down as we go. It's always best to kind of work away from where your hand's going to go. So in this case, I started from the right, because I'm obviously left-handed, not that you guessed, and start from the right and work my way to the left, or if you're right-handed, do it the opposite way around, okay? Just a few here and there, just kind of finish it off. Then we need to let this dry for half an hour, or something like that, depends on when it's dry. You know when it's dry because it'll be quite tacky to touch. So that's dry there, and you can also see it shining as well when it's not dry. Okay, but it's quite tacky to touch when it's dry. Right, so back in a minute. Right, the colours I'm going to be using for the background for the otter are going to be as follows. We'll try and keep it simple, so no more than 3 or 4 colours. You don't have to use the same colours. If you haven't got that particular colour, use something similar to it. So for example, we've got burnt sienna, we've got permanent sap green, or sap green, whichever. Olin, or if you want to use lemon yellow, anything like that's fine. And we've also got burnt umber. Okay, you find that the colours that we've mixed here are going to be very watery, as you can see on here. See how much they tend to shake about. So you're looking at, for example, the burnt sienna is more water than paint, really, as you can see. The reason why I've got it this kind of lightness is I want to keep it quite light for the background, so more or less like a pastel-y feel to it. So let's go for that next. Okay, for the background we're going to use 2 different brushes, and this is going to be a standard little mop brush and an old size 18 Pro Art brush, which is very, very old. That's all I use it for, just putting background washes on, because it's so old you can't really do much else with it really. And we need to kind of wet this background 2 or 3 times as we go along. So let's get a bit more on there. Soak it through. Okay, so that's about wet on there. We'll let that soak in just for a minute, and we'll come back to that shortly. Okay, well that's soaked in a little bit. You can see like the way the paper's kind of undulating a little bit. But because I've already pre-stretched the paper, we know that once it dries, it'll dry nice and flat again. Alright, so that's what stretching is all about really. Right, so I'm going to go for the size 18 brush, and I'm going to go with a yellow first. So the Olin yellow, or if you've got lemon yellow, anything like that will be fine. But don't have it too intense, have it quite pale. So obviously a bit more water added, so it's a bit wishy-washy. Test out some test paper first, you know, the way I tend to show you on here. And just to make sure that it's not too bright. Okay, this is quite bright at the moment, but don't you worry. I'm going to make it a little bit duller as I go along by adding more colour to it. Okay, so again, up to the top of the paper. What you've got to remember when you're doing a background as well is that because I started there first, I have to make sure I keep going back there because it'll start to dry. And if that dries too quick, then therefore you end up with little blemishes or cauliflower marks here and there. Now I'm leaving little gaps in between this. Come back up to there, a bit more yellow in there. Just so it's not all the same, I'm going to go into the sap green next, okay? I'm going to drop a little bit of that in, just pick up any blemishes that tend to happen occasionally. All happens with me as well. Okay, and all I'm doing is kind of scrubbing it in by using the side of the brush, skipping places here and there. Alright, so don't do everywhere, just little sections here and there. Bear in mind we've got some more colour to go on there yet as well. And if we find it's too colourful, we can always take a little bit off, if need be, before it dries. Okay, so that'll probably do for the green, I think. Now for the burnt sienna. It's a bit warmer this, but again, don't use too much of it. Just little spots here and there. That's all you need. This will blend itself a little bit as well, you find. I'm just going to do a little bit higher up. I don't want to do too much higher up because it's mixing with the paint that's already on there as well. See, that's something else as well. Obviously, when you put this your wishy-washy colour on the wet paper dilutes it even more. So it's going to be even more, well, pale if you wish, when you finally get to the colour. Okay, and then we're going to go for the brown, which is a burnt umber. Just a few bits here and there. I'm going to keep this quite low now. Just a few. That's all I want to do. If it's too bright like that, just gently tease it away. Get anything that's popped onto the paper. And the same again. The answer as well is not to work the paper too much because you can obviously damage the surface of the paper. So don't overdo it. And once you think you've done, leave it to dry. Okay, and I think we're nearly there. I'll just ease that a little bit off there. Okay, and I think what we're going to do is yeah, happy with that. Right, so that's the colour on the paper. So what we've got to do now, I'm just going to take off a little bit of this run area, just by using the corner of a tissue, bit of paper towel, kitchen towel in this case, and just to soak up some of them little bits that's kind of dribbled here and there. And I think we'll let that dry now for 2 or 3 hours, and then once it's nice and bone dry, we'll come back and we'll take off the masking fluid. But obviously don't try to dry it with a hairdryer or anything like that, because you can cause problems as well. Because what tends to happen if you do that is that the masking fluid will go really hard and can end up tearing the paper away as well. So yeah, let it dry naturally. So we'll see you again shortly. Right, the background is nice and dry, which is great, which means we can make a start on taking the masking fluid off. Now if you remember last time round, if you did the last tutorial, which is the barn owl, we did a background on that one as well, very similar to this one. And when you remove the masking fluid, make sure that you remove it from the outside in, okay? So by using a very clean, dry finger, so very clean, dry finger, you roll the masking fluid in towards the otter in this case. And the reason why I do it that way around is because if the paper will tear, because sometimes it does happen, it does tear occasionally, just a little bit, it will tear in towards the subject side, in this case, as I say, the otter. So roll the masking fluid towards the otter, okay? Because if you did that way and then it tears the paper, it's going to pull a little bit of a line into the background, and you can't really repair that. So whereas if it happens within the otter itself or the bird, whatever you're painting, you can cover that up, right? Which is a handy thing about that. So that's not a problem. You can see all these little marks now, which are really standing out, and this is using that cocktail stick, so you can see the reason behind that now. So instead of just getting like a straight or jagged line, and trying to kind of replicate those little lines by using watercolour white or something, this way it's much better. So give it a wipe off very lightly, and there we go. So the next job is to get your reference photograph again, if you remember, which is this one here. Stick it back down, make sure you got it in line with your pencil marks. Remember what we did initially with all the drawings that we do. Get it in line with your pencil marks that you've got, okay? And transfer all these details then onto your paper. Right, now it's time to get started on the otter, and let's start on the eye. As you all know, I like to paint the eye first. So all the pencil marks I've got on there so far, we need to kind of dab down, so get a rubber. Just do the ones around the eye where you're going to be working initially. So I'm just going to go for just around the eye, just lighten it a little bit. I still want to be able to see it, but I don't want it to kind of disappear on me, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson on lamp black. And what we're looking at there, I'll try and get this out the camera going too bright, but this colour here, so there's your lamp black and a little bit of alizarin crimson in there. And just for the centre of the eye, it's not too thick. So it's quite watery, just initially. I'm going to get a size, let's go for a size 2 brush, not 00, just a size 2. And the first thing we're going to do is just wet the inside of the eye. Okay, I'm just going to wet it to the highlight area, which is, this is the little highlight you can see there. So just wet it to that area first. Okay. And it's quite wet, that, isn't it? Then whilst it's nice and wet, get that mixture of alizarin crimson and lamp black. Just drop that in. It's quite a warm colour, because the thing with this eye as well, there's blues, there's a little bit of brown in there as well, which we'll be using. Just kind of warm it a little bit more. I mean, the alizarin crimson is quite a warm colour anyway, but we don't want it to have a red eye, do we? So we want to be careful with that. So we're dropping that in just as a base colour, like we've done before in the past. So this is just something that we're going to work on top of. Okay, so that'll do for that. And then within there, what I want to do is get a little bit of French ultramarine. Just drop that in as well. Just so we've got a bit of a varied colour within the background. As I say, this is just the base layer. Just the foundations that we can build on top of, as per usual. just a little bit, because this will go darker on the next layer as well. Okay, so I think that's probably enough. We'll let that dry, I think, and then we'll come back to that once it's nice and dry, and then we'll start kind of getting a little bit more detail in there. Right, whilst the eye is drying, what I want to do is just work on this nose, just put a first layer of colour on there. So it's going to be a mixture of the same kind of colours really, so I'm just going to lighten this pencil initially, it's a bit too dark. Just by tapping, I tend not to rub, because you can damage the paper, and this is just a normal putty rubber which is quite malleable. What I want to do is just put a light wash in there first, so again, we'll come back in, this is a size 2 brush, not 00, size 2. Or whatever size you've got at hand, as long as it's not too big. And I'll start off by putting a wash. I'm not going to do the nostril hole initially, I just want to put a wash just around the nose itself. Okay, so the colour we use for the eye, which is that alizarin crimson and lamp black, you're going to drop that in there. You've got to remember this is going to dry a lot lighter than this, probably 30 to 40% lighter. And that's going to come around here. We're not worried about form and shape just yet. Just want to get something in there just to work on. And again, I'm looking down to here. You find that when you drop the paint in, it will find where the water is, because so kind of towards kind of the wet area, if you know what I mean. So as I say, this will dry lighter. Now, I'm going to use a damp thirsty brush, so there's hardly any water on my brush, it's very clean. I'm going to lift a little bit of that off. And I'm going to do the same again around here. Just a clean, nearly dry brush, that's all I'm using, just to let some paint out of the way. And I think probably maybe around there as well. Okay, just take a little bit off. Okay, and we're going to go into the French ultramarine, which is the normal, quite a watery kind of mix of French ultramarine. I'm just going to drop a little bit of that while it's nice and wet. Don't do it if it's drying, you have to put another layer over the top of it and wait for it to dry if it started drying on you. So while it's nice and wet, drop in a little bit of blue over the top. So we'll let that dry and we'll come back to that in a minute. Right, let's go back to the eye, and it's nice and dry on there now. Looking at it, it's like a grey, bluey, reddy, pinky, whatever funny peculiar colour it looks like at the moment. But that's fine because we need that, as I said before, as a base layer colour. Okay. So what I want to do initially with this is just kind of define where the edges of the eye goes. Okay, which is around there. Try to zoom in a little bit for you. Hopefully it won't lose its focus. How's that? Is that better? Hopefully it is. Okay. So this is just to define the very edge of the eye and work out where things kind of lay. Lay or lie? Where are you from? How do you say it? Again, looking at the shape constantly at the photo. So I'll try and bring in the reference photo for you again so you can have a look. And it's always worth, if you haven't got a tablet, is to print off the reference photo and have it by the side of you. Okay, and we've also got some details around here as well where the highlight is. So I'm just going to kind of roughly mark those in so I know where things go. I know where things are. Okay, we've actually got some very faint highlights in here as well. I think that's about right on there. Right, so now that's nice and kind of roughly outlined, which is something I don't normally do, because we're going to get rid of that outline in a bit anyway. We're going to wet this eye again, but only in the section below. So the bottom half, up to the highlight, where I've just put that little guide mark, so we know where things go. Just wet it down to there. And going back to your ready black, which is your alizarin crimson and lamp black, just going to drop that colour in from the bottom first, okay? Just right from the bottom first. Because I want it to kind of gradually get lighter as it goes up. This will then hopefully show the form of the eye, and if it doesn't we can lift some paint off, so don't worry. This will hopefully show the form of the eye and the roundness. But normally I will lift a little bit of paint off as well, just to kind of give that added effect. Right, so far and come back in with a clean, damp, barely damp brush, just touching, just titivating, just easing the paint up that little bit into the damp area. So we've got that graduation between dark and light, or light and dark, whichever way you want to look at it, all the way to the top. And we can define the highlight area once this is nice and dry. We'll still need another layer of paint on this, don't forget, which is going to be predominantly lamp black with a little bit of alizarin crimson just within there as well. But once that's dry, we can do that. So again, we'll let this dry, and while that's drying, we'll work back on the nose.
Hi, my name is Paul Hopkinson. So what I do, I show you my technique on how to paint wildlife in watercolour. We go through a variety of subjects from dogs, cats, insects and even botanical subjects as well. And I'll guide you through this right from the beginning all the way through to the end for those final brush strokes. You'll also find that with most of my videos you also get the outline drawing and that reference photograph as well. Every month we produce a PDF version, so a typed out version with photographs of that monthly main video. You'll get the PDFs for the months that you are a member. Now this is a very in-depth document with lots and lots of pages of information and instruction, as well as obviously the photographs as well. Now another benefit is that you get access as well to my private Facebook group. Now the good thing about my videos is that they'll be here 24/7. So you can watch them 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, it doesn't really matter. They'll always be there. You can stop, you can play, you can rewind, you can pause as many times as you want to do so. So that will give us some ideas on what you'll gain from being a member on my Patreon channel.
Right, so back to the nose, and we'll have another look at this one and see what we've got going on here. I want to kind of work out the shapes and where things go. I'm looking carefully, very carefully at the photograph now, and trying to look into the detail that we can see in there and the depth. So this is where the nostril hole, whatever you want to call it, the big gap, which goes into nothingness inside there, goes very deep. I'm just trying to work out how it all kind of shapes and comes around. So I'll keep looking back and forward at that photograph. This graduates from light to dark as it goes in here, and then we've got a line on the inside, which is where the other edge of the nostril hole, should we call it that? It's a nostril hole, that's what it is, isn't it? Kind of goes all the way to. So again, working out where things lie, where the shapes go, and this comes around here. Barely got any paint on my brush at the moment. This is my 00, by the way, just so you know which one I'm using. I think when we get onto the detail work, I'll be mostly using the 00. So if I forget to say, then you can just assume it's a 00. Besides, you can tell by my brush, because my 00 is my blue brush, as you can see here. Did I say blue brush or loo brush? I don't know now. I don't use a loo brush for painting, that's for sure. And, oh dear. So what I want to do, before I put the darks in here, I want to kind of get this graduation between this area here as well. So again, very lightly tapping around, work out where things go, don't make it too obvious. Just very barely, so you can just see it as we can on there. Look. So I'm going to work from the edge, okay, and work it around from the very edge as we go. Hopefully you can see this on the camera okay today. I'm trying to position the camera accordingly so you can see every detail, but it's not always that easy. So, okay, so I've just touched the very edge of that outside line there, and then with a clean, barely damp brush, just quickly washed it out and dried it on some paper towel, bit of kitchen roll, just lightly soften that down. I think I'll come back into it again, just add a little bit more, and just add a little bit more along this outside edge here as well. So once this is dry, we can then fill in this gap here as well, but we'll need more layers of paint as per usual in order to kind of accomplish that. We'll need this to go from light, so from light to dark, or the other way around. Right, so just kind of easing this out. Once it's nice and wet, this will blend lovely, so we get the nice kind of curve going on there as well. Okay, so that's what that's doing just now for us. Just working out about right, it's not too bad. And then we'll do the same on the left hand side as we look at it. So on this side here, we're going to wet the area first, so I'll get some more water pool. So we'll wet this area first. and not too wet. You don't want to run in like a waterfall. So if it's too wet, if there's a big bubble of water on there, just take a little bit off with a clean brush. Again, working with my size 00. Not that you already know that, of course. And very lightly just touching the edge, the very edge initially. I'd rather go to the edge first because we can then bring it in as we go. If we start from the inside and bring it out, I could end up putting too much paint on there. And if we do that, then we have to start lifting the paint off. So again, the very edge. There we go. Wash out your brush. Just give it a little tickle, barely touching the paper. And again, that's not far off. I think we need to add a little bit more down here. So just down this area here, look. Bit more pull. I'd rather do too little than too much. Okay, so you can see the shape starting to form from that now. We now need one on the inside of here. Dampen down the inside here all the way around to, looking at the photograph again, I can see where it's a bit darker just on the inside here. So again, oh, too much water on that, but just a little bit around there. Doing any more further up? No, I think that's about right there. And the same blacky red, which is the lamp black, and the alizarin crimson, just on the very edge. Let it soak up. If it runs away too much, you can catch it, okay? Not with a net, just, who's she anyway? Just catch it just by using a damp or nearly dry brush. I'll just show you with that. So I've just washed the brush out, it's nearly dry, and you can just touch it just to soften that little edge down so it's not too broken. See, when we start putting all the fine details over the nose with your little detail brush, such as this 00, all these shapes will start to show up then. They'll start to kind of work for you. So that's why we need to kind of get these as a main base kind of shapes initially to work from. So the next thing we need to do is just re-wet this area here, because that's about dry now for me. Make sure it's dry before you go for it. So a lot darker now, that area there. So again, you can do this on dry paper, just that top section's a bit dry actually, but I'll just show you that. As long as the paint's still damp, you can work it. So that top section is drier than this bottom section, so what I'm going to do, wash the brush out a minute, come back in, and I'm going to little circle motions and just soften that edge down, just soften it down, little circles, and again all the way down. Okay, yeah, that's alright. And then finally what we're going to do is fill this gap in. Okay, so that's a bit more lamp black, and I'm going to get some alizarin crimson there, but that's the colour I'm using on there. So it's lamp black and alizarin crimson, and with that colour I'm going to drop that into here. Okay, hopefully this is dry enough now, because I don't want this bleeding up to higher up there. So it's quite a dark colour, but I've enriched the black a little bit by just adding a little bit of red, that alizarin crimson, just to kind of enrich it a bit. Well, as I've said with black before, it can be quite dull, quite a bland, flat colour, so you know, you've got to do it that way. So I'm just going to soften the edge down, just with a damp, clean brush, just to soften it that little bit. And probably a little bit more on the inside than the outside. So again, just a damp, clean brush, just the very edge, little circles, just to soften that down. And don't forget, we will be using watercolour white, so we can always put highlights around here if we wanted to as well. So I'm just going to tidy this edge up here a little bit more. And we might reinforce this area down the bottom as well once it's nice and dry. Right, so we'll let that dry again, and while that's drying, we'll go back to the eye. Right, so back to the eye, we're going to use that same kind of blacky red colour, but this time a lot thicker and more black than red, okay? So basically what we've just been using on the nose, for the hole in the nose, a nose hole. So I'm going to just do the very edge with this initially. This is the 00 brush again, as per usual. And this little tear duct or little water drop, whichever it is now, I'm still not sure. And to the top. Okay. And I think what I'm going to do, if I make it so it stays wet just a little bit longer, the little tip is to have a wet line. So if you want to blend this to a nice kind of soft edge, put plenty of paint on, not too runny. And then you can wash your brush out very quickly. And you can just dampen the area above that area there. And then like we've done before, little circle motions, just tickle that into that damp line. Tickle it in. Tickle, tickle, tickle. Just a little bit. Okay. So you can see the shape starting to form in there now. Just by making sure we've got that dark line on the outside, wetting above it, and then tickle the dark line into the wet area. So we're going to get, because you've got the water, so the water dilutes that dark colour as it goes up. Right, so now we want to kind of put a line along here as well. Again, we'll look deeply at all the details on this one as we go along, but I just want to kind of get the background layers on first. So it's nearly there. Nearly there. Is it? Yeah, it is. Honest. And then around the front as well. Around the top. So you can see all the layers that we're putting onto this, just to kind of make it work for us. But you do need those layers, okay? You can't just go straight in there with the colour and expect it to work, because it's not that straightforward. But you have to be patient and make sure you do it bit by bit without getting frustrated. Just take your time with something like this. Yeah. Right, so that's that there. So we're just going to soften that line down just a little bit. A nice soft edge. Just on the underside of this line, not above it, because that's where obviously the highlight's going to be. Okay, again we'll let that dry, and while that's drying we'll go back to the nose.
Also, don't forget to click on that subscribe button down below, and don't forget that bell icon as well, just so you'll never miss one of my YouTube videos.
So what I want to do again is just darken down the underside of this nose. Fair amount of paint this time, and this is of a kind of creamy consistency, this paint. And while I've got this paint on the brush, I'm just going to darken down the nose hole just inside there. Okay, and we'll get all the details in shortly, so that's going to come very soon. You have to remember that my technique is a slow technique, and if you want to try and create realism, you have to do it gradually, bit by bit, and be patient with it. Right, so we've got a wet line above again, as I would normally do. Just a wet line above, clean water, and then just tickle that in. Little circles, that's all I'm doing. Tickle it in, tiny, tiny circles. Just so it blends nicely into the wet line above. Okay, so that's basically all I've done with that one, little tiny circles. Again, we'll do the same on this one. Just want this to be a bit darker again. Now it's dried, it's dried a bit lighter as it always does. You can go darker if you want to. You can put a darker colour on, a thicker colour, initially, but then you got the avoid risk of going too dark to begin with. I'd much rather put on a few lighter layers to make it darker than going too dark to begin with and realise I've just overdone it. So I'm just being a bit cautious, a bit wary, just making sure that it's right. So a wet line away, remember, and tickle it in little circles into that wet line, as you can see there. Okay, right, oh, that's getting there now. It's nearly there. It's nearly there. Excellent. And I think I'll just soften down around there. So just with this damp thirsty brush, a little damp brush. And I think all this area now I've got these shades in there, needs again to be softened down. So I'm going to go for a watery version of this dark colour, just along the edge. So this needs kind of be set back a little bit now. So it's two of the same tone as that. It needs to be a lot darker. So now I'm going to bring that dark line over the top. We've still got the shape underneath. So I'm quite happy with that. Just to set it back a little bit more. So now you can see the nose starting to take shape. It can look even better, which is the next stage where we get the detail over the top. Right, so back to the eye on the 00 brush. And I think what we're going to do, I'm just looking at the shape of this one. Yeah, I think we need to kind of make it a little bit more defined now in places in the middle. So again, what I'm going to do is just wet the eye over the top, barely, just lightly touching it. I don't want to scrub too much because it'll end up wearing the detail away underneath. Okay, so I'm going for that wishy-washy version of the blacky red. So Alizarin Crimson and Lamp Black. And I want to paint in just a line, dab it in that way, and then around that way. So a couple of little lines, just add a bit more detail in there. This will be very soft and barely noticeable when it dries, but it's going to be there, okay? And again, we'll have the dart there to be able to lift some paint off for the eye to create a few different highlights in there as well. Right, okay. So I'm happy with that as it stands at the moment. And I think while that's drying, just wash your brush out and then we'll put a line of water down here. Try not to touch this wet paint now, okay? Otherwise it will end up bleeding into this section as well. Just a line of water to there. And what I want to do is get a little bit of blue paint, just very watery blue. So this is French ultramarine, watered down. So it's more water than paint in this case. Just watered down, and that's going to come over to here. This will all come obvious once it's all on there. Okay, and then blend that in, barely touching the paper. To there. Right. Because there's a bit of a shine going on underneath here, so I need that blue as a base colour initially so we can work out where it all goes. Okay. So let's start off on, in my case, I'll start off on the right or left hand side in this case, and I'm going to tap all the time, just keep tapping. Initially, we'll put some little lines in between this as we go along. Tap, 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 tap. Where it's darker, where see it curling around, put a few more taps in there, okay? So you got more dots in the darker areas. You remember the old TV screens where, as kids, we used to get close up to them, we used to be able to see all the little dots within the TV screen. That kind of reminds me of that doing this, it really does. Back from my childhood days, which was quite a long time ago now. I know, don't tell anybody. So, plenty of little dots. I've not reloaded the brush yet, but I will do shortly. Just to get some details in there. We will need to put highlights in here as well, and we'll do that with some watercolour white at some point. But it's not that imperative, we don't have to do that right away. I still haven't loaded the brush up, but I will do in a minute. Yeah, it's getting lighter. You can see it's getting lighter and lighter, which is beneficial. That means it's going to vary the tone as I go through. So a bit more paint there, and a few more dots around here. Again, I'm barely touching the paper here, so you don't want to go too heavy with the paint. And when I put paint on the brush, I don't know if you can see it on the palette. I'll try and bring it into shot without it going all blurry on us. I tend to get the brush and I roll the brush, so roll it. I'll do it on the white so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm rolling the brush into the paint. And that's how I kind of maintain a point on the brush. And sometimes if you've got too much paint on the brush, then it's worth just dabbing it once on a bit of kitchen towel. Just take a little bit off. People also ask me, how do you hold the brush as well? Down to how comfortable it is for you. If you want to be a bit freer with your strokes, and therefore you'll hold it all the way to the end. Okay. If you want more control, you hold it near the metal ferrule. So I tend to hold it here. So I like the control in the brush, so it's worth bearing that in mind. Right, okay. So that's about right, just about. So a few more around here. Okay, we're still going to put some lines in there as well, don't forget. So tapping all the time. Now because the nostril curves in along this area here, what I'm doing, I'm making more little tap marks, or more little dots, if you know what I mean. just towards the nostril hole, just so it gives that shape. A few more around that area, just overdo it a little bit more, and then ease off with bigger gaps in between each dot as you go away from the nostril hole. Alright, and then the same around here as well. So you can see that's starting to give a feel of shape and form as we're going along here. The same will apply to the bottom, okay? And as we come up away from the darker area, the dots will get further apart. But we'll come down to the darker area, we'll keep the dots closer together. Okay, so again, increasing the dots in the darker areas. Okay, it's fairly dark around here as well. So I'm going to put some dots in this area as well as we go along. Right, okay, it's really good. And a few more around there. Right, okay. So you see that starting to form now, we're getting some form of shape going on here. So at the next stage, for the nose anyway, we'll keep working on the nose because that'll dry very quickly. We'll start putting some finer lines in here so we can see how it's all going to work out. Right, let's pop back to the eye now. And what I want to do is put a few more details in there now. So I think initially what we need to do is wet the highlighted area. So let's get some life going in this eye now. And the way we do that, or achieve that, is by looking at the shapes, looking at the highlights, and the highlights use the key, but not overdoing the highlights. You don't want to put too many in there because it can look a little bit false, okay? So we'll just wet the area first. Come in with a little bit of watery French ultramarine, so it's very watery. I'm going to drop in a few areas of this. I'm not trying to cover every single section up, I just want to get a little bit in there. Okay, so don't cover everything up, just pop it in. And then we'll come back in again with that same kind of browny reddy, so blacky reddy colour, which is the alizarin crimson and black. And we'll pop that over the top. This is a very watery version, by the way. So more water than paint, you can, it's barely tinting the paper. Just enough just to kind of soften this down that little bit. Alright. Just to kind of get the details in there that we need as we go. Okay, so far. And then what I want to do is soften the edges down of all these little bits in there. I don't want to blend them all together completely, just by touching it and softening in places. That's all I want to do. I'm going to need a little bit darker in that area there, looking at it. Remember, when we get the white highlights in little areas within this highlighted area, that's when it will come alive, that's when it will pop out a little bit more. Not that we want the eye to pop out, if you know what I mean, but poor thing. Right, so that's that bit there. Again, we need to let that dry before we can define this edge around here, just to kind of get the right shapes going in there. Right, the next thing we want to do, if we can, is lift a little bit of paint off, okay? So, and that's within the eye. You've got to be careful not to touch this area up here initially. I might have to add a little bit more dark in there. I think I'll do that just now. Just a little bit of dark in here. Not too dark, I just want a little bit in there. Probably something like that there. Okay, a little bit more down, blend it slightly with a clean damp brush. Okay, right, back to what I was talking about. I want to try and get some details in. So we've got a bit of a curve around here. So I'm going to go over the same line time and time again. This is the edge of the eyeball. Just keep going over that line with a damp brush, just a few times. This is the speed I would normally do this. And then once it's wet, hopefully, you can lift off a faint line, which is ideal. That's exactly what we're after. Just a faint line, just to show the edge of the eye there. A tiny bit more. Okay? Yeah. And I think what I might do as well, just do the same kind of idea around here. Not too much. Lift a bit of paint off while it's damp. And again, the same, probably around here. Just kind of get some shape and some other details showing within the eye. That's what I'm looking for there, as you can see. Okay, and lightly blend it so it's not too defined. You want it to kind of, you can't see where one edge starts and the other edge stops. So keep it nice and blended as you go along. And then we'll come back into that highlight area using that darker, the red black colour. We're thinking about the shape all the time as we go along. These are the shapes. And then with those marks, I'm going to lightly blend those away. Not completely. Just by tapping around the edges. Don't want to fill all the area in, just want to bring it around. I think it's probably a little bit too browny black, that one, so I might drop a little bit of blue in there as well. And probably around here as well, obviously we need to dampen that one down. Again, looking back and forward at the reference photo, just so I can see all the details within the photo as we go along. Okay, he's starting to come alive. I'll try zooming in that a little bit more for you so you can see that bit more of the detail in this eye. So I'm going to lightly blend this now. Now it's dry, I'm just going to soften it back. Just so we've got a variety of kind of colours in there, which we have now. So just a variety of colours we sort of want to work on. I'm not coming right to the edge though, because I need to kind of work on this edge shortly. So just to soften it, just knock it back a little bit. So it's not too sharp on the lines. Remember, this is a curved eye, and we don't want all the ends to be sharp. Okay. The only sharp bits is going to be the highlight areas, which we'll do in a bit. So I think what I want to do is look at the shape. So that comes down to about there. Goes up, then across, then up, then comes down, and then up, and comes down, and then a little bit more there, and a little bit more there. And again, we're working on the highlights as we go along with this, just so we can kind of get that worked out. And I think that's not far from there before we put the white highlight on the top, which I think we'll probably do now. Okay, let's go for the highlight. Right, let's get a nice little highlight in the eye now. And what I use is this one here, which is the SAA opaque white. Okay, and that's one of the ones I tend to use. You can use gouache if you want to. You know, they are very similar in the way they work. So let's see if we can zoom in a little bit more on that one now. I want it so it's like a double cream, really. Get your brush in and roll it into the paint, okay? Brush in, roll it into the paint, and then wipe it off. And by doing that, you can end up with a nice little point on your brush. So, if we tap this colour in now, just around the very perimeter, put a few highlights in as you go along. Don't overdo it though, otherwise you cover all the detail up inside. So again, a little bit more. Just in places. Don't have to get exactly the same shape as what's there, obviously, but as long as it's near enough. Who's going to be comparing, apart from yourself? You are your own worst critic, obviously, so. And a bit more down here as well. Remember, you can soften this down afterwards as well. If it's too bright, which some of this might be, you can bring it, make it a little bit softer. That comes down a bit lower, that part there. That comes down to there. And do the singing. And then a little bit more around here as well. Okay. So far. Right. So a clean, damp brush. I'll say that slowly. A clean, damp brush. Lightly tapping the white will soften and knock it back that a little bit more, which is what I'm trying to do here. So again, for this area here, wash the brush out, give it a wipe, then lightly tap in. The little white area will soften that white that little bit more. If you find that some of the colours disappeared, you can, if you want to, add a little bit of blue in there, which I'll just do now. I'm going to get a little bit of French ultramarine. So French ultramarine, and I'm going to tap this in, barely touching that white paint, because you know that white paint will end up disappearing on you otherwise. And it can go a bit muddy if you're not careful, so barely touching it. Just to get a little bit of colour in there is what all I want to do, really. Like that. Okay, I think we're about there. So, we'll zoom back out again. Just a little bit. And that'll give us some ideas on how to work on the highlights for the eye. And if you find it's a little bit too sharp in places, you can just lightly tap it with a damp, clean brush, just to soften those edges down a little bit. So it's not so sharp. Okay. Right, let's do the same thing on the nose. Okay, working on the nose, we'll just move that along a little bit more so you can see it. And I wonder if I can go in a bit closer for you. I'll try. Yeah, that's about as close as I can go with that, I think. So again, we're going to go for like a double cream consistency on the watercolour whites. So let's get tapping. So here we go. Right, I think we'll start from the top, and we'll start tapping from the top. Don't overdo it. Don't put too many taps in. Don't put too many highlights in there. Keep looking at your photograph, because you don't want to end up with a white nose. All right, this will darken, should I say, as it goes. It will get a bit softer in colour. It won't be quite as bright white when it dries. So I'm again barely touching the paper and working around where things go. Just kind of building up the detail as I go along, really. If we need to, we can go with some fine lines again over the top of some of these areas if need be. But, you know, see how it looks at the end of it, and if we need it, we'll add it in. There's no hurry, there's no rush to get the painting finished. The painting takes as long as it takes, okay? Yeah. So again, working on where it's lighter, and where it's lighter, as we did with the dark areas, add a few more dots closer together, which will make it a little bit brighter. As you probably noticed, I haven't reloaded the brush just yet. As you can see, I'm still getting some marks. I don't want them too blobby, you see. I don't want them too sharp. So as it gets towards dark area, I'm going to kind of ease off the dots. So I want to show that roundness. I don't want to end up covering it all up. So again, come down. Still not reloaded yet. Again, coming down as we go along. Now this has got more of an edge to here around this area, so I'm going to tap in a few more closer together around there. Coming around the bottom as we go, and as you come around here, keep looking at the photo. Remember, how many times have I said that? Keep looking at the photo. I'll keep looking carefully at the shape and think, okay, there's more white in that area, and there's a bit of a squiggle white there, you know. Okay. And looking at this outside edge, because we've got the nostril going down there, there's a few marks in here, but not many. Just a few, just to show a little bit of reflection in there. That's all it's for. And a few more around here as well. Okay. So now we're getting more of a realistic looking nose going on. But I think what I want to do with this, I'm going to get some French ultramarine again. Very watery. And tap only once in one area, and the reason for that is because you'll end up washing the white away if you're not careful, just to get some colour on the top of that, to show a bit of reflection, a bit more colour in there as well, isn't it? So okay, I think that's plenty. That's all you need to do, really. So there we go, we'll let that dry and then we'll kind of reassess it, and if you wanted to we can add some extra little white dark lines, like a little bit of blacky brown or whatever, in certain sections of that, just kind of give it a bit more definition in there as well.
Join me in part 2, where we will work on the ear and the base layers of fur detail. I'll see you there.